Hi, Roger Griffiths here at The Hub. Welcome to this, our continuing coverage of election 2025. It is day number 24. I'm joined in studio by Amanda Galbraith, the Oyster Group. Amanda, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me back.
Sean Spear is on the line, my co-founder and co-host of the program. Sean, day 24, 2 weeks in, another week or so to go.
Yeah. And also the 90th anniversary of Mark Carney's political career. He launched his leadership on January 16th. Wow. And so he's had quite a run, hasn't he?
He has. Let's just quickly get our viewers and listeners caught up on the campaign as we go into day 24. Everyone obviously prepping for the big debate. So they're all in Montreal because that's where both the French language debate will take place tonight and then the English language debate tomorrow. Carney's got a small business meeting in Montreal, and Pierre Poilievre will have a presser later in the day. Understandably, with debate prep, key funding announcements are scarce in the last 24 hours. The Liberals have been out, though, with a job training program for skilled workers, $15,000 going to specific sectors of the economy, from the trades to AI, all supposedly in support of the Canadian economy adjusting to tariffs. Amanda, I want to start with you, though, with the debates. They're going to happen tonight in French, tomorrow in English. This morning, we're seeing some news out of the debate commission that the Greens have been excluded at the last moment. What's that like in a campaign where I presume the staff and the leader have been preparing for a certain format for 4 or 5 other leaders on stage with them, and suddenly someone's out of the equation? Does that change the dynamics, the prep, how you think about the debate with the Greens not being there?
Certainly it will change the dynamic. It depends on the campaign. So for the Conservatives, they're probably happy that they don't have a third francophone eating up airtime, right? Probably even the NDP, in so much as they are alive and exist. Definitely the Bloc are fine with this. I would say the Liberals under Carney in particular would be the most set back by this change, because he had a fifth person on stage who would
hide behind.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah. Who's not going to be an opponent of his, who's literally, they've repealed, allegedly repealed candidates out of certain ridings to help the Liberal Party or help stop the Conservatives. So I think this is the biggest blow to the Liberal campaign, not to be to anyone. Given the amount of people on the stage, it's less of and the role the Greens play, it's less of an issue than if a Blanchette were to drop or the NDP were to drop. Yeah. But it is significant because these parties have been preparing for weeks for this. And also, again, just speaks to the idiocy that is the National Leaders Commission.
Here. No argument for me there. What do you think, Sean? I know you and I were texting about it this morning. I mean, what a schmozzle, to put it politely, this commission kind of blowing 2 elections worth of debates. It now, in a sense, has its third kick at the can, and it's not looking good going into tonight and tomorrow, is it?
Yeah, I mean, just such a shambolic effort to host debates, and what, as we've been discussing over the course of these daily shows, is a high-stakes election. Canadians tell pollsters that there's going to be a high number of people watching these debates. And so the kind of bureaucratic mishandling is just such a letdown, such a kind of a failure of state capacity. And we can talk a bit about that if you want, Rudyard. But to seize on Amanda's points about how this will affect the different parties, I've been struck, if I think about it, how the Conservatives have been able to get away in this campaign without saying a whole lot about the environment. They haven't had an environment day during the campaign. They've committed to repealing the consumer carbon tax. We haven't heard a lot about their alternative ideas. Pierre Poilievre has essentially made the case that Canada's principal way to support global climate efforts is to export cleaner Canadian energy to other countries around the world. Had May been on stage, she would have sought to prosecute a case on climate change vis-a-vis the Conservatives. And so that, for all intents and purposes, takes that issue off the table, and I think enables Poilievre to really zero in on issues that resonate with Quebecers, including the Conservatives' relatively stronger stance on immigration, its stronger support for provincial autonomy, and so on. So notwithstanding the huge failures of the Leaders Debate Commission, I think on balance, as Amanda says, this is a decision that advantages the conservatives.
Yeah. Amanda, you got the French language today, English tomorrow. Pierre Poilievre quite strong in French. Mark Carney supposedly having some moments here with the French press. How is that likely to play out? I mean, and I guess to you, just as a seasoned campaigner and someone kind of in tune with the media, how important are these debates? I mean, we're a long way from, John Turner and Brian Mulroney going mano a mano over free trade and the nation, glued to their screens for 2 hours. People are surely going to interact and consume this debate in very much a 21st century fashion.
Yeah, I think they are increasingly candidly relevant as much as I love to watch them. I think also candidly organizations like the Leaders Debate Commission are part of what makes them increasingly irrelevant because they don't adapt to the way modern debates are consumed. If you look at what they're doing in Quebec, Tout le monde en parle, 5 chefs, I mean, those are dynamic, interesting formats that actually are consumable in small blocks that you can watch. This is not it. But they're still important, and it is really one chance. We're the nation, kind of. We build it up, right? People do tune in, even if it's for a 30-second or a 1-minute clip. And I think that is significant and important for all of the parties, but in particular for the Conservatives, who really need to kind of differentiate themselves. It's also a unique circumstance, and that this is the first time that we'll actually see Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre up against each other in both official languages, but I think particularly in English. We have not been afforded that at all. How are they going to match up? What will they look like, right? You can actually kind of put them eye to eye and say, like, when I go shopping, do I like this dress or this dress? Like, which one do I want? So I think that is an important thing that will be happening, but do I think it's going to, maybe we'll have that knockout punch that we all dream of in this modern age, but I doubt it. I also think that people are underestimating Carney's ability to perform in these debates.
Yeah. He's got a lot of experience in front of cameras.
Exactly.
He survived the Fleet Street press in the UK, which are the most vicious journalists in the world. And I always want to remind people of that. This is a guy who's spent his time in front of microphones.
Yeah, exactly. He's experienced. Has he done a debate? He's been in the House of Commons? No, but he's also like president of the Chatham House. I mean, literally, he's a professional debater. So I think he will be able to hold his own against Poilievre, and people should expect that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just jump in, guys. I agree with everything that's been said. But I do think at least tonight in the French debate, Blanchette is the X factor. He's the only one for whom this is the only audience to whom he's speaking. The party has underperformed, I think, expectations over the past few weeks as we've seen the Liberal Party rise in the province. This is obviously a big moment for him to make the case against Mark Carney and the case to Quebecers to support the Bloc Québécois. If the Bloc Québécois could make gains in Quebec, that may ultimately be what stands between Mark Carney winning a majority government or not. And so I think this is the biggest night in Blanchette's political career. I think he'll be front and center prosecuting the case against the Liberals.
Yeah. Amanda, you could see a scenario coming out of this debate where, tonight, as Sean said, Blanchette gets his opportunity. Maybe Jagmeet Singh gets an opportunity tomorrow. Mark Carney probably is going to be, as the front runner, I want your advice on this, but would be more in the defensive position. He doesn't need to go on offense. Pierre Poilievre probably has a straddling maneuver where he needs to seem approachable and accessible to Canadians while at the same time, prosecuting his case against Mark Carney. If you're in the Liberal campaign, are you a little worried about these dynamics? Because there has been some softening of the polls the last couple of days. We'll have some new numbers in a moment from David Coletto that show that softening in his polls too. Maybe these debates could be more of a turning point than people realize if some of these pieces fall in over the next 48 hours.
I mean, I sure hope so. We could. I think it'd just be good to have a national conversation too about something other than the U.S. government and Trump, right? I actually think we need that as a country. But yeah, I think the dynamics going into this debate certainly are stacked against Carney to a certain extent, and that he's the front runner, right? That's always a tough spot to be. All of those other leaders are going to be taking runs at him. I think the challenge for Pierre, as you pointed out, is he's got to take a run at Carney, but he can't be so pugilistic that it puts people off, right?
Yeah.
So my guess is you'll see Carney acknowledge, pivot a lot to camera and not directly. That's what they'll be telling him to do.
Right.
But we've seen sometimes stuff gets under his skin, right? And I think that is where the other leaders, if they're smart, they're going to try and poke those buttons for him around his integrity, his finances. Anywhere he feels really personally affronted, he goes hot. So I think they're going to try and do that, expose that. Pierre Poilievre's job, I think, is to keep a level head because he's really got to speak to women voters, older voters who will be watching this debate. So I expect an acknowledgement, and you'll see a lot of pivot to camera.
Yeah.
Amanda,
Sean,
that's great analysis. I just wanted to put a follow-up question to you because Pierre Poilievre has been in politics for a long time. He's basically a known quantity. We have, I think, a good sense of what would animate his prime ministership. He's also rolled out a pretty extensive policy program that ostensibly would form the basis of a governing agenda. Mark Carney, by contrast, hasn't committed to a lot of policies in this election campaign. He's run mostly on vibes, which is to say he's made the case that he's uniquely positioned to represent Canada vis-a-vis the United States and has left a lot of what would animate his agenda mostly unsaid. We don't know, for instance, precisely what he would do on the environment and energy. We don't know what he thinks about Canada-China relations. We don't know what he thinks about a set of issues that you could broadly define as identity politics or wokeism. Like, isn't there an imperative for the Conservatives, not just in these debates, but over the next several days, to essentially fill in those blanks, to communicate what a Carney government would look like? Because it seems to me one of the challenges here is that at this point, Mark Carney, should he win, will have a broad yet mostly undefined mandate to kind of fill in the blanks himself after Election Day.
Yeah, I think certainly that is the issue, right? Is who will he be as prime minister? Should he continue on in that role? And what does that look like for Canadians? I mean, Gordon Campbell actually has a really interesting opinion piece out this morning where he talks about some of the, the musings or the vibes that the Carney campaign's put out, but what that actually means for Western Canadians, what not repealing Bill 69 is all about, what keeping emissions cap on our, would do to our getting energy out into the world. So I think, it's the Conservatives' jobs to do that. I would also say traditionally, and I'm not one that criticizes media because as a kind of a semi-member of them, I understand they're working hard, but those questions should be put by the media to the Carney campaign. It can't just be like, what are you going to do about Donald Trump every day? It's what is your policy on that? What are the implications around that? I think the Conservatives will try, but it's not really, I don't know if that's Pierre Poilievre's best position in the last few weeks of this campaign, but certainly surrogates, secondary tour, other people in the public, the media need to be really, truly kicking the tires of what this government is going to look like. Because let's say they do have a majority mandate. We don't know what he's going to do on China, on energy, on pipelines. Like those are real concerns for me. Even on the carbon tax, what does that look like? Well, we're going to replace it with something. Nobody knows.
Yeah. Final question, Amanda. Tonight we're going to have the debates are not the monk debates. I did a monk debate. I did an election debate in 2015 as a moderator, so I know what it's like to sit there on the stage and have that pressure of the nation kind of watching. And we have Steve Paikin in the chair tonight. Thankfully, the commission's moved away from its innovation the last two elections of having 5 moderators. I'll be very interested to see, and I wonder your advice as someone who is in the media, whether Paikin leans into this or not, because he certainly has the experience and I think the credibility to do that. And I hope that's what we're going to see tonight and tomorrow night, because I think that could make for a much more valuable conversation. Put some direct questions to these leaders. Yes or no. Maybe do a follow-up. Yes or no. I'm hopeful for that. I'm just curious if you have any advice for Paikin as he considers moderating these, at least the English language tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's a Radio Canada anchor that's doing tonight. But listen, honestly, far be it from me to give advice to Steve Paikin, Canada's national treasure of a moderator. I mean, I think he's an excellent pick for this. Yeah. I think he absolutely has the credibility. He's ruthlessly nonpartisan. And good news is the rules allow for the moderators to do follow-up and to push. And I actually think if anyone can do it, Steve Paikin can. So I do hope he does press them. He does those follow-ups. And I think the important thing for him is, which I've seen him do in the past when he's done other provincial debates, is he does the follow-up, allows the response, but doesn't sort of chase it down a partisan end that will, alienate any one side. I think he does a really good job of demonstrating, hey, they didn't do the answer, and then we move on. So I think Paikin will be well, but the moderator, to my mind, actually needs to be an active participant in this debate to guide it along, which is what we saw in the Quebec renditions of Tout le monde en parle, Cinq Chefs. And that, I think, is what makes sure we keep these leaders accountable.
Yeah. Okay. From your lips to Steve Paikin's ear. Let's see if it happens. Amanda, we're going to have you stay right there. Sean, what are you going to, before we go to our next guest, let's just get your quick reaction to what you want out of these two debates. What's the one thing, if you came Thursday night, 10 o'clock, and say, okay, mission accomplished?
Yeah, I think it's as Amanda says, is the different messages to different parts of the country. Like in the 19th century, Rudyard, when campaigns were fought on trains, you could say something in Quebec and a week later say something in Western Canada, and the same people wouldn't know about it. But that's just not the case in 2025. Mark Carney has tried to have his cake and eat it too on energy and the environment and pipelines. He's been for pipelines in Western Canada. He's doubted pipelines in Quebec. Having his debates back to back, I think, over two nights will be an opportunity to press him on some of these fundamental questions where he doesn't have the luxury of being able to say different things to different audiences.
Well, let's go to one of our favorite pollsters that we've been in touch with throughout the campaign. That's David Coletto, the founder and CEO of Abacus Data. He's got some hot polling numbers, a world premiere, a debut of some data he's got out in the next couple hours, but we're going to have it first here on the Hub's 2025 live election coverage. David, thanks for coming on the program.
Good morning, gentlemen. How you doing?
Let's bring up on the screen here your latest overall vote intention numbers. Walk us through this. What changes are you seeing or watching, especially as when you compare this latest vote intention you have dropping at noon today with your previous polling?
Yeah, so this survey was completed on Monday and Tuesday of this week. So I'm serving it as almost like a benchmark before the debates, and we'll do a survey right after. But we're seeing a continuing drop in the Liberal lead. Remember, a few weeks ago, it was 6 points. Today, we have it at 2. The Liberals at 40, the Conservatives at 38. It's down 2 points from last week. So there's a signal that at least at the national level, this race is tightening up a little bit. We've seen some other polls that are showing a similar kind of story. Still advantage Liberal. I mean, even with a 2-point lead, the regionals really favor them. They're ahead in Ontario. They're well ahead in Quebec and Atlantic Canada, competitive in BC. But it does suggest that, this race isn't static. And as the issue salience of different things change, it could also mean that voters are changing their mind on who they're going to ultimately vote for as voting starts this weekend.
I was going to go precisely to the regional question, David. It's axiomatic in Canadian politics that for Conservatives to win, they actually need to be higher than the Liberals by a margin or a cushion nationally because of the relative efficiency of the Liberal vote in different parts of the country. For those who don't think about these issues all the time, can you help our listeners and viewers understand this point?
Yeah, I mean, first thing, remember, in the last 2 federal elections, the Conservatives got more votes than the Liberals, and yet the Liberals won substantial more seats, even though it was a minority. And so, Sean, to your point, they need to win upwards of 5 to 6 points, maybe even more nationally over the Liberals to win a majority government, right? Now, they don't need that to win more seats than the Liberals, but they've got to do better than they are right now in Ontario. The Liberals can't sweep large parts of Quebec if that's going to happen, and BC needs to be I think more solid, and they've got to hold on to everything they've got in the prairies. So right now we're seeing indications that perhaps there's a little bit of movement happening, but certainly not enough at this stage that your viewers who want a conservative government that we're moving that fast, or that there's going to be enough for that to come out. But movement's movement, and I think that's suggesting that tonight's debate and then tomorrow's debates could be consequential as voters continue to make sense of what's going on in this campaign and what they want out of it.
David, let's go to another slide here with some of your latest data dropping today at noon. You're getting the global premiere, the debut here on the Hub's 2025 election coverage live on YouTube. This is desire for change versus re-election. What we're seeing here, David, just explain to our listeners who aren't on the live stream. Come on over to the live stream, check it out. You've got, it's definitely time for a change. Basically, for the first time, retesting its high that you've surveyed back on March 20 of 57%. So we've seen a noticeable uptick here, David, from April 10th, 51% of voters saying it's time for a change, definitely, to now 56. So how does that impact the campaign?
Well, it's, I think we've talked about this before on this show, about this kind of dueling ballot questions, the frame by which voters are going to make their choice. And, I think what we're seeing in this most recent survey is a statistically significant change in that desire for change, right? We ask it on a scale. So, do you definitely want to see a change in government? Would change be nice, but it's not that important? Or do you want to see the Liberals reelected? And that 56% who now say they're definitely wanting a change in government is getting closer to that point in which, an incumbent gets in trouble. It's not there yet, but it's a far different place than they were last week, where we saw that number drop to 51%. And that's a kind of a safe re-election place for a government in a multi-party system like ours. So I don't know what's driving this. We have other indicators in the survey that suggest, that Trump versus change dynamic again is flipping. Maybe it's because Trump has been less salient, less engaged in our own thinking about this election. It could be. I've noticed in the last few days more conservative ads that are really making the case for change, right? Like vote change, vote conservative. That could be a factor. And also keep in mind that Mark Carney has been pretty quiet the last few days, and so if he's not out there litigating his version of the case and he's leaving the ground for the Conservatives, it may be working. And so this is something to continue to watch, because if this number keeps going up, that's a good sign that the voters are in a mindset that are going to be much more appealing and more open to the Conservatives, mind you.
Sean, why don't you walk us through the next slide here? So I'll put it up on the screen, and you can just give your quick reaction to this, and then flip a question over to David.
Yeah. There's an expectations game here for Carney, at least in the English debate, which will create an interesting dynamic. They've managed expectations in the French language debate well, but it's still interesting. Like I'm sure both of you have seen, there have been different instances in this election campaign where he's been asked a French question, and in response, at different points, he's had to transition to English. If something like that were to happen tonight, it would be a big deal. It seems to me, David, as we were just talking with Amanda, tonight's a big night for Blanchette. Do you agree? And if so, why?
Well, I think it is. First of all, I mean, he's the only leader on that stage who will have his first language is French, has the ability to kind of do things I would not understand as someone who doesn't speak French very well, and use colloquialisms and references that if you aren't really comfortable in French, you may not even understand, which would really, I assume, stand out to a francophone audience in a way that it wouldn't for somebody like me. And so for Blanchette, like, he's got to find a way to make his party and himself more relevant again, and to do that might be to undermine Mark Carney. I mean, both Pierre Poilievre and Blanchette are going to target Carney in both debates, and it's almost like they have to, right? In Quebec, we're seeing the Liberals in some polls up over 40%. They're coming into Bloc territory, and there is a version of this election in which the Bloc could even lose official party status, like they did after the 2011 election. And so Blanchette's, I think that the expectations are pretty high for him, and I think the stakes are really high for the Bloc in tonight's debate.
David, thank you so much for coming on with all this.
Roger, can I
You want to squeeze one more in?
Do you mind Do you mind if I jump in, if you'll permit me? David, one of the reasons we love having you on is not just your top line polling, but that you go deeper. You do a lot of fascinating analysis. One piece you wrote for us, even before the campaign, created proxies or archetypes for different types of voters for the different types of parties. So you've thought deeply about the voting coalitions of the different parties. Over the past couple of days, of course, there's been this running tension between the Conservative Party of Canada and representatives from the Ontario Progressive Conservative Party, including, of course, Premier Doug Ford. Can you help our audience members understand the extent to which there is overlap or there isn't overlap between the Conservative Party voter coalition in the province of Quebec, or pardon me, in the province of Ontario, and the PC's voter coalition?
I mean, there is a lot of overlap. Close to 80% of voters would vote for both the Conservatives federally and provincially. But there's also some groups that diverge, right? That we always talked about these so-called Trudeau-Ford voters that voted for Trudeau in the last two federal elections, but would have voted for Ford provincially. There is a little bit of Carney-Ford voters in Ontario, right? And I think they're really important parts of the province. They're in the GTA. They're boomers. And right now, I think the fight, if I'm a conservative, is in large part for those boomers, right? They're going to be tuning into these debates, and particularly the English language for Ontario audience on tomorrow. And so that battle with Ford, I think, I don't know if it's breaking through. I sometimes think this is kind of like an inside the Ottawa bubble kind of fight. And do voters like my mom, as she's in her late 60s, living in Richmond Hill, Ontario, is she going to make sense and say, well, if Doug Ford is, talking about strategy and polls and politics, is that going to change the way I feel about the choice here? I don't know. But I do think that a lot of the reason Doug Ford won his majority and is connecting with those voters like my mom is the same reason that Mark Carney is. And so Poilievre has to figure out how to break that tension that I think exists around Trump and the threat that he poses to those voters. And I think the debates might be an opportunity for him to do that. But there is quite a bit of overlap.
You remember, David, that after the 2016 election, there was a lot of analysis about who these Obama-Trump voters were. It seems to me we may have found the next article for you at the Hub. Who are these Ford Carney voters, and what are their demographics and characteristics, and what animates them to support Ford in Ontario, but Carney nationally? It's a fascinating question that may ultimately determine the outcome of this election campaign.
Well, now you've sparked the interest, and we're going to do a post-election survey, and that will be one of the research questions I dig into in Ontario.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I'll tell you who they are. They're wealthy boomers checking their stock portfolios every 5 minutes as they sit in homes that they enjoy, mortgage-free, valued in the millions of dollars.
Watching an unlimited amount of news on TV.
Exactly.
It's like, they got time and money. It's
basically the people
we all wish we had more of.
Who have not experienced a lost decade. They've had a pretty good decade these past 10 years. David, thank you so much for coming on the program. I love having you on, and we'll get you back, obviously, as we get into this all-important closing week after the debates, after the Easter long weekend, and probably people's opinions becoming a little more fixed, a little more certain about how they'll be voting at the end of the month. So we'll talk to you then, and in the meantime, be well.
Thanks. You too, guys. Take care.
Sean, just to wrap up today's show, some great guests. Really appreciate having Amanda Galbraith on, and of course, David Coletto. But just to reflect a little bit at the end of today's show about these debates coming up. It's been, as you know, a bit of a sore spot for us here at the Hub. We feel like this commission has not had the scrutiny that it deserves. And boy, with this kind of flip-flop on the Greens and the fact that, Mark Carney didn't participate in the TV ad debate, so we're only going to get 2 debates this election, not 3 like we had before, and certainly not 6 like we had in the 2015 election before the arrival of this debates commission in 2019. I just wonder, if we can agree on anything coming out of election 2025, if Canadians can put their finger on one thing to say, okay, let's do this, please, let's abolish the Liberal, Freudian slip of the tongue there. It's not the Liberals Debates Commission. It was created by the Trudeau government, but the Leaders Debates Commission. I expect you to agree.
Yeah, well, I won't say too much because I'll hand it back over to you. One of the reasons I've been so proud to work with you at the Hub is that this is an issue that you've championed that virtually no one else has. I don't think a lot of people think about the mechanics of debates, how we organize them, who's involved, how we decide what issues to talk about, but they matter. They matter a great deal. And as we've discussed on this show in the past, we had an imperfect system, but it was working, and it was working without the role of government. And in hindsight, one of the more underreported yet consequential decisions that the Trudeau government made was a government takeover of what was previously a private sector or civil society led process to organize and hold debates. And the government takeover has produced the results that I think, at least I would argue, is kind of predictable when government tries to take over things that were otherwise working just fine through voluntary exchange and all the rest. They've been costly. They've been staid. They've been boring. They've been
political.
Been political, and in recent days,
what?
they've been incompetent. They set a set of criteria to decide who was in and who was out. In hindsight, it seems self-evident that at least it was that those criteria were set in part to create a basis or a rationale to exclude the People's Party, but incorporate the Green Party. And then, of course, when the Green Party clearly fell outside those criteria, the Leaders Debate Commission scrambled for a few days to figure out how to rationalize their ongoing inclusion to the point that they couldn't anymore. And on the morning of arguably one of the most important set of debates in modern Canadian political history, it's had to call this audible. It's embarrassing. And by the way, this is all being financed in the millions of dollars of taxpayer money that previously didn't need to be used for the purposes of organizing and holding debates. I said I was going to hand it back over to you, but here I got myself.
I love it. You're fired up.
All worked up. But I don't know. Like I don't know if you have any closing thoughts. But I would just say that sometimes we can be a bit abstract and conceptual, and I apologize for that. But one of the reasons that we think that as much of our lives, collectively and individually, ought to be left to individuals making choices or coming together through civil action or whatever, is because oftentimes when government gets involved, not only does it bungle things up, but it also necessarily preferences one set of choices over the other. And in this particular case, the debates have been closed to different voices, different groups, different ideas. It's a one-size-fits-all. And it's self-evidently failed, and it's to the detriment of the country that it has.
Yeah, well said. Just my two closing comments are one that, as you say, there's a crowding out. The government intervention always occurs. Not that all government intervention is bad, but whether it's in the market and the economy, it has an effect. It crowds out civil society
Yes.
and private actors by the very nature of its size. And in this case, these commissions
Yes.
are part of the government. They are legally constituted as agents of the crown. They have a lot of legal and other authority that comes with them. And then second,
Yes.
it's that old problem of a solution looking for a problem. This was not a problem. We organized these debates for decades through broadcasters, and then more recently in 2015, I moderated a monk debate that was a federal leaders election debate on foreign policy. The Globe did a debate. Maclean's did a debate. There's a history here, I think a history we should lean into, of civil society during elections running as much of the election as we can, and keeping the state and government out of elections. Yes, let them rule set on donations, let them rule set on Voting, obviously, the sanctity and security of the election, there's certainly a role for government there. But debates, come on. This is taking the role of government in the WRIP period to a whole new level. And
Yes.
I just think demonstrably now, the record of that, it's pretty abysmal on three elections. We'll have to see how these debates go tonight and tomorrow, but we'll break it all down for you here at the Hub over the next 48 hours and into the weekend with the roundtable. Our big Saturday edition, Sean's weekly wrap, will have a lot of post-debate analysis for you in the days ahead. So I'm going to say goodbye now to those of us joining the program as on-demand video and audio listeners and viewers, and then I'm going to say hello in a second to all the good folk on the live stream who've been part of our live chat over the last 30 or so minutes, and we'll take some questions from then and wrap up today's live stream. So here's that bye-bye.